Delighted to be joined right now by former Brexit Secretary, Conservative MP David Davis. Good morning to you.
Morning.
Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Let's talk about one of these topics we've spent so many years talking about over the years, not just with you, but with many others. And this is what to do with illegal migrants, people who've come to our shores, who've got no right to be here, often have come in illegal ways, and what we do with them and how we get rid of them. Well, I mean, because let's face it, that is our top priority for an awful lot of voters, not just Tory voters. Yvette Cooper, the new Home Secretary, Shadow Home Secretary for many years, she has pledged to detain more illegal migrants and carry out a record number of deportations. She's going to expand immigration detention centres. An extra 300 extra places to be created. I'm not quite sure if that touches the sides. And she plans to remove more than 14,500 illegal migrants in the next 6 months. That's higher than in 2018 was Theresa May was Prime Minister. I think you were in office then, although that was one of the lowest actually years in terms of deportations. First of all, do you think she's going to be able to do it?
Well, no. I mean, as you said, the 300 extra places are neither here nor there, frankly. I mean, they're a matter of days arrivals at the peak of the season. But in terms of deportation, someone's got to take them. And I mean, this is how we got into the whole Rwanda argument in the first place. And I must admit, initially, I was sceptical about the Rwanda policy effectively deterring people, but we did actually see it do so because they left to go to Ireland when they thought it was going to happen. Remember?
Yeah. I did love the irony of it becoming Ireland's problem, but I wanted it to be the Republic of Ireland's problem, not for the people of the Republic of Ireland, but the government, of course. You know, they made life so difficult for us over Brexit. I kind of thought, well, you know, it's your problem now.
Well, they sort of bought the problem, didn't they? Really, and it created the problem. But what they demonstrated was there was at least some deterrent effect, which we weren't sure of until then. And the other thing that's going to go on, of course, is that most of the rest of Europe are going to follow Rwanda-style policies. They're already trying to. I mean, even the European Union itself, as an organ, is doing it. So if we're not careful, we could be the only country with nowhere to deport people to. So, I mean, I'll pay attention to Yvette when she tells us where she's going to send them.
Well, and this is the issue, because we're often told, you know, oh, it's because of Brexit. You know, well, you know, when we were in the EU, we used to be able to send all these people back. And in fact, actually, the big drop had happened long before we actually left the EU, and it's not got anything to do with the EU, as it's different interpretation by the courts and the tribunals of the human rights legislations. I mean, just not the law didn't change, people interpreted differently, but also where people were coming from and the inability to return people to some of those countries. That was more of the issue, wasn't it?
In essence, yes. I mean, there was also a thing called the Dublin Convention, but that didn't work very well either, I'm afraid. So losing that wasn't quite so painful as it might have been. But the simple truth is that unless you get a return arrangement with the country they're coming from, you have to have a third country to sell them, to send them, and that's what every other country pretty much in Europe is coming to.
And copying us. Copying us.
Right. Copying us. And actually, I mean, the irony is, I started off being, as I say, sceptical about the Rwanda policy. I ended up thinking, well, actually, you know, if everybody follows the same route, then maybe it will work, you know. And that's what is going to happen without us now. So I don't know where Yvette's going to send them. I really don't. I don't know. You know,
I don't know if Yvette knows where she's going to send them. But you've got to remember, it's all predicated on we're going to have nice conversations with people in the EU, and they're just much better at getting around the table with people. That's what they keep telling us.
Well, it's not going to happen. I mean, I'm afraid the hard truth is that the European Union, I mean, perfectly understandably, operates in its own interest. It does what its own people want. You know, it's got elected governments too, and they have to talk to them. And if you think migration's a problem in this country, try going to Paris, try going to Berlin and looking at the streets in those countries. They've really got serious migrant problems, and they've got problems, and they can't even house them, as indeed we can. So they're going to do what's right for their own people, and you can't blame them for that. And the idea that because there's a nice, soft, cuddly Labour government in, that's going to change things is for the birds. It's daft, frankly. It's completely naive.
And so Well, we shall wait and see what happens. And again, certainly from the reaction we're getting, the phone lines and indeed on texts and tweets, it's very clear there's abject cynicism from the British people about this. And the Tories talked a good game, didn't do it. Labour talk a good game, not going to do it. And this is just going to be an ongoing issue because this view that, well, the people in charge don't really personally think it's a problem because it doesn't really impact them.
Well, I'm afraid there is a bit of truth in that. I mean, I live in the north of England, and when I talk to people, particularly from industrial West Yorkshire, way back in the Brexit days, you talk about Brexit, way back in the Brexit referendum, people say to me, "Oh, I want to vote Brexit because I want to control the number of people coming here." And we weren't talking illegal migrants here; we're talking legal migrants. And don't forget, by the way, we thought we had 3 million Europeans in the country. It turned out we had 6 million. Yeah. So that's how uncontrolled it was before. So let's not lose sight of that. But the reason they wanted to control it was not because they didn't like foreigners. It was because it undercut their wages. It put pressure on their social services. It put pressure on their housing. It actually harmed their families. And that's the real reason for concern about it. It's not racism. No. It's not xenophobia. It's simply people trying to look after the interests of their own families. And Labour really have to understand, I'm afraid the London establishment don't. From the London establishment point of view, it's cheap plumbers, it's cheap staff,
cheap nannies, cheap cleaners.
It's all of that, and which is great from that point of view. But if you live in Barnsley or Doncaster or Bradford, it's not the same, I'm afraid.
Absolutely.
And you're fighting for a job.
I think at this point I'm just supposed to shout racist and bigot at you. I think that's the norm now. Or if I'm at the BBC, I'll just think it and make sure you know it in my tone of voice. I mean, that's... Look, we've had this for years, David. You know what did you make, by the way, talking of the Brexit, Sadiq Khan, the London mayor, because he spends so little time worrying about actually what happens in London. But he's hinted at a Brexit split with Keir Starmer. He suggested the UK could rejoin the EU in the medium to long term. He said there will need to be a conversation about whether we have a better future inside the EU or outside of it. But he said he conceded it wouldn't happen in the short term. Of course, bearing in mind that the election manifesto, Labour said there'll be no return to the single market, customs union or freedom of movement, which means you can't be in the EU. Those are key pillars. What do you make of this?
Well, I think he's just playing to his London establishment again. I mean, it's not going to happen. I mean, I can't see it. I mean, look, for two reasons. One, they made some promises and they'll fall very badly on their face if they break those promises. But the other thing to bear in mind is that the European Union is not doing very well at the moment. Look at how Germany's doing. Used to be the powerhouse of Europe, is now struggling. Look at how France is doing. And whether you're talking about industrial policy, you're talking about exports, you're talking about growth, you're talking about employment, or indeed you're talking about migration issues, they're suffering on all fronts more than we are. So the idea that somehow going back into Europe will help us in some way is mad. And I'm afraid that the deal we'll get will be a very bad deal too.
Yeah. We won't have the rebate that Margaret Thatcher negotiated, that's for sure.
You won't have the rebate. You won't have the rebate.
I think it would be a great opportunity for the rest of the European Union to find out where to put the illegal migrants they don't want, because I think we would become the dumping ground.
Well, I mean, even in the soft conversations that have been happening so far, they've been talking about having a free movement for young people. Now, young people means under 40, right? We're not talking about students. Free movement for young people, all sorts of other arrangements which would suit the European Union. They've got a shopping list as long as your arm.
Yeah, absolutely.
If we turn up to them, they'll be demanding things right, left and centre. It's a very bad.
Can I just ask you about one other aspect of things? Now, there was a lot of criticism, and rightly so, about cronyism in the Tory government over the last few years. I mean, many different leaders, of course, but just basically, if you're a mate of Boris Johnson, if you're a big crony or a donor, you're giving him a house to live in or something, then you get special access. And very, very legitimate question marks about some of those contracts over COVID as well. But we've got a new cronyism route, just within weeks of Labour taking office. Of course, we've got a woman woman called Jess Sargent. For the last year, she's been the Director of Constitutional Change at Labour Together, which is a Labour think tank. They've got very close links with Keir Starmer. And basically, she's just been given a top job at the heart of Whitehall. It's emerged she's been appointed the Deputy Director of the Cabinet Office's Propriety and Constitution Group. Now, this is the organisation, the body that's set to, it's got to ensure the highest standards of propriety and ethics across all government departments. Bearing in mind, this is where Sue Gray, now the Chief of Staff, having gone from being a civil servant, was involved. This is about ethics, ministerial investigations. Big question marks about this body, well, certainly when Boris Johnson was Prime Minister. But how appropriate is it for a political ally from a Labour think tank to be appointed to a senior role in this body to oversee Labour ministers and, in particular, the Labour Prime Minister?
Well, it's not. I mean, look, I don't object to political appointees in government. I mean, they've been around for a long time. Margaret Thatcher had them in her day, a small number, but had them. But there are jobs which you can put people in and jobs you can't. Now, obviously, the Prime Minister's press officer can be political, of course. But something like this, it will undermine the belief in it, not just in the public at large, it also undermine the belief in it in the civil service. Yeah. I mean,
ethics should be an independent issue, not a party political issue.
These are the sort of roles where someone would go, if they're a whistleblower, maybe, to talk to. Well, you're not going to do that if the person in charge is party pre to the party in government, and that's so. It seems to me very unwise. I don't think they've thought this through at all well. I mean, when you consider how long the Labour Party were expecting to be in government in the last year, they haven't done a great deal of forward thinking about some of their appointments.
No, indeed.
I'm quite astonished.
I would have thought Sue Gray, apparently, I would have thought she'd have vetoed this if she had been back in that role. We'll have to leave it there. Always great to talk to you. David Davis, Conservative MP, still I'm delighted to say, former Brexit Secretary.